Hello everyone and welcome back to my Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So this is a series where I either go through my own personal Commander decks or those submitted by users and break them down to their core mechanics. I'll talk about the Commander, what the deck's generally trying to do, give my critiques, and wrap it all up with my thoughts at the end. If you want to get your own deck reviewed, make sure to head up to the top link in the description to get your deck personally reviewed by me. With all that out of the way, let's get into today's episode, which is really cool. Another awesome, I've been doing quite a few Final Fantasy Commanders because, that set's about to come out here pretty soon. A lot of cool stuff. Of course, Final Fantasy is full of a lot of very well-known characters, and, very much we're in a place with Magic where a lot of stuff panders towards Commander, so we're getting a whole bunch of legendary creatures with this set, and a lot of them are really, really nice and are really, really powerful. So this is one of them for sure. Of course, Sephiroth, one of the biggest characters. I'm not even a huge Final Fantasy person. I haven't even played really many of the games, but this is, Final Fantasy VII, one of the more well-known of the series, and he's one of the biggest bad guys there is. So I think this card is very, very cool and very much relevant to sort of the themes with being a sort of mono-black aristocrats type card. And that's very much what this deck is. It's all mono-black aristocrats, and I think he's one of the first that is a blood artist effect, the aristocrat effect in the command zone. And if you don't know what an aristocrat is, it's basically just a card that cares about creatures dying, and that can mean a whole lot of different things. But for this deck specifically, it's usually creatures losing life when creatures die, that sort of thing, specifically with Sephiroth especially. Sephiroth here, he's a double-sided card, so Sephiroth Fabled Soldier is the front side. It's a 3-mana 3/3 that says whenever he enters or attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw a card. So that's kind of nice, an interesting little ETB effect, and it also triggers a second effect, which is whenever another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, which is literally the Blood Artist effect, which is cool. But if this is the fourth time this ability has resolved this turn, you transform him. So I kind of like that. The hard part with a lot of transform commanders is the fact that you don't really get to activate it very easily, because a lot of them are, a high mana cost to activate that, but a lot of times you can get him down and activate on the same turn. And there's a lot of ways you can kind of not quite cheat, but accelerate that effect a lot easier too. But here on the backside, we got Sephiroth Winged Angel. And I just have to say, use the full art here. I think it looks so good. I love this artwork as well. And I know Tetsuya Nomura, I think, is the original artist for Final Fantasy VII. At least, a very prevalent artist for sure. I've even heard of him. A lot of great artwork. And this is one huge piece with, Sephiroth on the bottom and, the big Winged Angel Sephiroth on the top. Very, very cool. Love the artwork inside. It's another part of it. But here we go. Sephiroth Winged Angel is flying. And one of the crazier things about this card is he has effect called Supernova that says, as this creature transforms into Sephiroth Winged Angel, you get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. And that is super duper nuts. Getting an emblem that's a Blood Artist effect is really, really good, because, of course, with emblems, there's no way to get around them. And for most emblem effects, emblems in the game are usually relegated to Planeswalkers for one, and not just with Planeswalkers. It's usually the ultimate. It usually takes a few turns. It's like the big giant thing a Planeswalker can do, but, right here we get it for free, which is awesome. Like, it's not technically free with the transform, but very, very easily. We don't have to work for it once we've gotten to the second side. And Sephiroth himself is a 5-mana flyer. Now, whenever he attacks, you may sacrifice any number of other creatures. If you do, draw that many cards. So you still get to keep your front side effect of the Blood Artist trigger through the emblem, but then you also get sort of just a really great, better version of his effect on an attack trigger that he originally had. So a really, really cool deck. So this one specifically, I've built bracket 3. You've only got 1 game changer, no tutors, none of that sort of things. I try to not put tutors in too many of these decks, partially because I like the more casual nature of it, especially if you're playing in, I think bracket 3. Try not to run too many tutors just because, the deck gets more efficient. There's no combos or nothing in here. There are variations of the deck, of course, because you're running this. You could run Gravecrawler combos where you're sacking Gravecrawler over and over and over again. And really, if you think about it, you very easily could get infinite mana off of that and then cast Sephiroth over and over and over again, because he can re-trigger. You go to the other side and you can get infinite emblems or whatever, just infinite triggers. Actually, for this deck specifically, because you have a really good payoff in the command zone, you very much could do Gravecrawler combo if you can get infinite mana in this deck and you have infinite Salk outlets, that sort of thing. You could do that. You could also do the sort of Sanguine Bond, Exquisite Blood combos, where whenever opponents lose life, you gain life. Whenever you gain life, lose life. could do that in here. I tried not to put any of those in here because I wanted to strictly make this more about Sephiroth and what he's doing. We got a lot of really cool cards to go over. So firstly, of course, we have a lot of aristocrats in the deck. There's, a lot more blood artist effects in the game. It's a very, prevalent thing of when creatures die, target opponent loses life or every opponent loses life. But because we have it on the command zone, I tried to run a little lighter on that specific effect because you just don't need it as much. It's just not that important when you can already do it all the time. And of course, the super effect of him on the backside. And the cool thing, if he ever does flip to the backside, the fact that you do get an emblem, it's not even written on the card, the blood artist effect, you can recast Sephiroth again. And then after that, immediately cast him again. And then, if you can flip again, it's part of that infinite, but just in general, if you're able to play him multiple times and be able to transform him multiple times, you can get multiple emblems, which is really, really cool. But with our aristocrats, we have, of course, Blood Artist whenever it or another creature dies. And the cool thing with Blood Artist specifically, it is target a player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, but it's any creature, so it's not just your stuff. Though, of course, with aristocrat decks, you're going to be, a lot of your stuff's going to be dying and you're going to be sacrificing a lot of your creatures anyway. But Blood Artist is cool if, there's someone that has like 20 creatures on the field and someone board wipes, you get a whole bunch of value off of that. And so a lot of times, honestly, Blood Artist can be a linchpin for board wipes because if someone, destroys everything and there's a good amount of creatures out, someone's getting drained for a whole lot, so that's pretty big. Drivnod, sort of the ultimate aristocrat if you think about it. He's a 5-mana 8/3, which is kind of a crazy stat line, but he says if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So it's good with a lot of the deck, of course, like all these aristocrats, Drivnod, of course, triggers off of or makes them trigger off of, which is really nice, kind of does that sort of thing. Just a lot of extra value out of that stuff. But the best thing really is with Sephiroth, it's a good way to speed up his ability because you only need 2 creatures to die in your turn with Sephiroth and Drivnod out because, of course, it double triggers, meaning that, the first something dying, you get 2 triggers, second you get 2 triggers, and of course that's the 4th trigger, and so he flips. So that's kind of cool off of that. And then once he's on the backside, you just get a bunch of extra triggers. Though doubling almost any of the triggers in the deck is really, really good, but some of them, like Pitiless Plunder, is a really great effect. Whenever a creature you control dies, you create a treasure token. So getting 2 treasure tokens whenever any creature you control dies, and that's another thing. Pitiless Plunder is another one that very much can go infinite very fast because it just says whenever another creature you control dies, not non-token creature. So if you're making zombie tokens or whatever, have them die, you get treasure tokens back, whatever. Loops can be done with that, which is kind of nice, but just in general, kind of a nice effect, kind of allows you to keep going with a lot of your stuff where you can play 1 or 2 mana things, sacrifice to get mana back, and then kind of keep doing that. Some other stuff in the deck, I wouldn't really quantify it as ramp because it's a little too hard. You not only need to pay 4 mana for Pitiless Plunder to be out or get him on the battlefield in some way, and then you also have to have something die for you to get the treasure token, so it's not really reliable in any way, so I didn't really put in that category. Fumulus, the Infestation's kind of a cool, I really like a lot of these Jumpstart cards. So this is Jumpstart 2022. A lot of weird, random, cool sort of, and a lot of really powerful legendary creatures coming out of these sets, and I like showing them off when I can, because I feel like Jumpstart, especially the second one, kind of flew under the radar, but there's a lot of cool stuff. So Fumulus is a 4 mana 2/2 flying death touch, and the biggest thing here is whenever a player sacrifices a non-token creature, any player, create a 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. So that's really cool. It's really big later on with our Edict effects, where if we have each player sacrifice creatures if they're non-token, off of anyone sacrificing things, we get a token creature, so that's kind of nice. So if that sort of stuff starts happening, is kind of cool. In place like Blasphemous Edict, that sort of thing where you have mass sacrifice, you can get even more value off of that's kind of nice. It also has whenever an insect, leech, or slug, or worm you control attacks, if any player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, that doesn't really matter. Maybe we attack with Fumulus and it triggers itself. We mostly care about when we sacrifice non-tokens, we get tokens back, which is just nice because it kind of gives us, sort of a double sack out of our creatures because we, sacrifice that, get a creature back, sack it again. Just a lot of ways to keep generating creatures, because that's another really big thing with this deck, is you want to make sure you have creatures to sacrifice, but you want sack fodder. If we have, 3 creatures on the battlefield, but these are 3 creatures, we don't really want to sacrifice to Sephiroth or anything else, because these are the creatures we want to have around when stuff gets sacrificed. So you want to make sure tokens, especially, there's a good amount of token creation in this deck, specifically creature token creation, because you want to make sure that you have, a bunch of fodder zombie tokens, 1/1s, whatever, whatever that you can sacrifice and have all the other stuff triggered, though we are also reanimating stuff, so there's a lot of different things you can do with it. But yeah, mostly getting those tokens is really cool off of him. Grim Haruspex, so whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. So just, you know, there's a lot of these type of effects as well. When stuff dies, you draw cards. So another way to kind of just keep fueling our stuff. Also getting extra triggers off of like Sephiroth ability, where when he enters something dies, you draw a card off of it and then you get an extra card. Just keeping our hand full, because we're going to be running a lot of stuff, because a lot of the stuff in the deck is pretty low to the ground. We do have some higher, you know, CMC splashy stuff towards the end, but a lot of our, you know, mana curve is, you know, 3 and below. So we're going to be casting a lot of stuff, especially, you know, turn 3 and 4, and with all the, you know, ramp we have in the deck, you're going to be able to cast a lot of stuff very fast. So we want to make sure we keep, you know, putting cards in our hand to cast again. Liliana, Dreadhorde General, I think it's our one Planeswalker in the deck. 6 mana with 6 loyalty comes in. Its static ability is really nice. Whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card, so that's cool. It's not on token, it's any of your creatures. It has an uptick for one that says create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, so that's cool. That's honestly really big with this deck. Anything that can repeatably give you creature tokens is really nice, so that's kind of cool. Give you more fodder. -4, you can have each player sacrifice 2 creatures of their choice, so that's really cool. Of course, an effect like this, we'll kind of talk about edicts a little bit later as well. We're having a bunch of people sacrifice stuff, so an easy way to flip Sephiroth with that. And of course, if you uptick then downtick, you've already made yourself tokens. You know, she kind of synergizes with herself like a lot of Planeswalkers do. And if you do get to ultimate her for the -9, you can have each opponent choose a permanent they control of each permanent type and then sacrifice the rest. So basically, if they have 4 creatures and 2 enchantments and, you know, 4 lands, they choose one of each, and they only get to keep that one. They have to sacrifice the rest. So if, you know, they have one of each type, they're only getting to keep one of those types. 1 artifact, 1 creature, 1 enchantment, 1 land, 1 planeswalker, that sort of thing. So I mean, really the biggest thing here is it's each permanent, it's the lands that matter the most. That's gonna really screw people over. If you manage to ult it, this is probably the game, because having to set someone, you know, if this is coming down at least turn 6, even if you get to ult it, you know, 4 turns later by upticking it, or it's gonna be, you know, turn 9 or 10 by the time this usually ultimates. If you get down on turn 6, people going from 10 lands to 1 land, that's going to be over. So that's kind of a cool thing. I don't really take that into account with these sort of planeswalkers, especially ones that have that hard of a thing to get, where it's 4 turns later that you're managed to do it. If no one interacts with it, you get the ultimate. But ultimates in general, I try not to really worry about, because it's too much sort of speculation to get to, and people are going to be trying to kill this thing. Planeswalkers, I just don't expect to stick around. It's usually the immediate downtick or the uptick or 0 ability or whatever that really matters. And of course, static abilities are always a plus as well. I really like Marionette, I would say Master all the time because I'm used to that card, but Marionette Apprentice is really cool because when it enters, it has Fabricate, so you can also have it make a token, which is really cool. So even if you reanimate and that sort of thing, I'm getting a little bit of extra value right off the bat. But it also says whenever another artifact or creature you control is put to the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is just a Zulaport Cutthroat effect. Of course, Zulaport Cutthroat, whenever a creature, it or another creature dies, each one loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. These, of course, are best really for this deck because we're not only sacrificing our own stuff. Yes, Blood Artist is any creature that dies, we get to ping someone, but these ping each of our opponents, so we're just doing more damage overall, which is kind of cool. Marionette Master just being the better card because it also has the Fabricate on top of that and also cares about artifacts. So if you know, treasure tokens, whatever, it also takes that into account. Massacre Worm, its second line of text says whenever another creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. I've seen this card because it is an edict or a board wipe type of effect, giving all creatures -2/-2 until end of turn when it enters, or opponent's creature specifically. Not only is that sort of a one-sided board wipe, it also just does, you know, -2/-2, especially the 2 toughness. That's most creatures in Commander anymore, especially if someone's got a token deck or whatever. Killing a lot of stuff, and if you're killing, you know, 5-10 creatures, someone's losing 10-20 life, that's gonna really put them down, or a lot of times even kill them. So, you know, very much a top end card. It's 6 mana, but it definitely a fun one for this deck, and for, you know, really any aristocrat deck, it kind of does the whole thing. Morbid Opportunist. So I was actually really high on this card for a very long time because it only triggers once per turn. And whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn. But what I skipped over multiple times with this card is this: one or more other creatures die, not your creatures. Usually this sort of thing, you know, with Grim Haruspex says another non-token creature you control dies. With Morbid Opportunist, if, you know, creatures are dying every single turn, you could get 4 cards per turn rotation, which I think is a lot better what this is doing. So I think I kept it in here because that is a good effect for what it is. It's restricted in certain ways, only triggering once each turn, but it can trigger every turn on everyone's stuff. So that's kind of nice. Upon of Ulamog, so this very much ties into our sort of token game plan and just, recurrable creatures. This is when it or another creature, non-token creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may put a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn token onto your battlefield that you can sacrifice for 1 mana. So really the big thing here is, again, it's sort of the double life of your creatures. When it or another non-token creature dies, you get another creature back that you can sacrifice again. So just more and more stuff out of your creatures. The more we can use our creatures over and over, that sort of recycling type thing is really nice. And if you got a Driv Knot out every single time something dies, you get 2 things. And the other part of this is it's not just a 1/1 token. It is technically sort of a mana dork. You can sack it for colorless mana, so that's another way you can kind of generate stuff, or maybe sacrifice a few things to some sort of effect to sort of even ramp yourself if you really wanted to. Kind of just a neat effect, good card for the deck. A Meat Hook Massacre, so it's second to abilities, it's a board wipe, but it also says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, so Zulaport Cutthroat. And the other cool thing is whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life, so this is just a better Blood Artist effect on top of everything else. It hits everyone, which is really cool, and it cares about their stuff dying to gain you life, which is kind of an interesting effect. But yeah, that's kind of our aristocrat stuff. We have a lot of stuff that triggers on dying, but these are very, very much the most notable ones. And with the board wipe category, we've kind of already talked about 2 of them, so Massacre Worm is a pseudo board wipe. It doesn't destroy all creatures, and it's only giving everything -2/-2. But with my experience playing this within Commander, that's wiping a significant portion of most boards. And really, one of the bigger things with this is also the fact that it's just opponent's creatures. The fact that it's one-sided is so huge as well. One-sided board wipes are always good because you can wipe everyone else's board. You're the only one left. You can swing in, or you just have more on your board. You're making more progress than other people. And of course, with board wipes, if it's a mass board wipe, it resets everyone. But if you're able to keep your stuff, it kind of speeds stuff up. Board, gets around that sort of board wipey, very long game sort of thing. Because I know all the very long games, 3+ hour games I've played, it usually is because there's been 5 or 6 board wipes in the game, and that kind of just makes everyone kind of reset. So having that's kind of nice, but of course you also just need your regular board wipes in the deck. So Massacre, you can pay X into its mana cost, and then each creature gets -X till in a turn. So again, you can kind of vary the size, which I think is really cool. If opponents have a bunch of 1/1s and you want to keep your 2/2s or whatever, you can very easily do that. The cool thing is Sephiroth himself is a 3/3, so you have a little bit of leeway. You can do 1 or 2 without killing him, or if you're able to flip him to the backside, he's a 5/5, so you can go pretty far up with that. So I like the modular board wipes. Like Toxic Deluge is also really cool, not only because it's 3 mana, but the fact you can pay life instead of mana as the X cost. So if you do need to wipe everything, it's a very, very cheap board wipe, at least mana wise, which is really cool. And Living Death, it's sort of a board wipe. It's kind of an interesting one. It's very much a technical, sort of depends on the situation type board wipe. It basically switches the graveyard and the battlefield. So if all the creatures on the battlefield get sacrificed, and then everything in the graveyard returns to the battlefield, and all the sacrificed creatures go to the graveyard. Basically what it says, it's kind of a weird wording to make sure that there's no intermingling, but it switches those 2 creatures, so you can get a whole bunch of death or a bunch of creatures, death triggers, that sort of thing. And then usually when you're loading up your graveyard, you have some sort of sack outlet. You sacrifice all your creatures, cast the Living Death, make sure you want to be careful as well, and that's sort of the situational part of this, is the fact that you want to make sure opponents aren't playing graveyard decks, or at the very least they don't have a bunch of stuff in their graveyard, because you don't want to give them a whole bunch of value. I have definitely, the line I've seen used with this is people got maybe 1 or 2 creatures in their graveyard, but nothing that's going to be devastating. You sacrifice your whole board to like a Phyrexian Altar or something, cast the Living Death, get all your stuff back. You've got your death triggers, you get ETB triggers now, got a whole board, just a bunch of extra value for that 5 mana, and it's also a board wipe on top of everything else. So that's all very cool. With card advantage, we have a good amount of card advantage in the deck. So the one thing to note is definitely that Commander is card advantage on both sides. Not the greatest on the front side because it's an ETB or attack, so pay 3 mana, get him down, draw a card is okay if you sacrifice a creature, and the attack the next turn is whatever. Really, the backside is a lot better. You do have to sacrifice a whole bunch of creatures to get the card draw, but it's a way better effect to get mass card draw. But just having that on a commander always makes it better, so you don't have to earn as much card draw. Though a lot of our stuff kind of just incidentally does that, and I do like making sure that you have a good amount. I try not to put a lot of village rights type effects where you can sacrifice creatures to draw cards, because if it's too dependent on your creatures, early game, that they're not as good, because if you have nothing to sacrifice, it's kind of just a dead card in your hand, so you want to kind of balance those effects. So I only have a few in here. So Plumb the Forbidden by itself is just a 2-mana draw card, which is kind of okay, but you can sacrifice it to copy the spell, and for each creature you sacrifice, you copy an additional time, so that's kind of cool. Sort of like a one-time Sephiroth type effect, but you do lose life off this one, so it's not as good that way, but I do like the modularity of that. Deadly Dispute is probably the best one. As an additional cost, you can sacrifice an artifact or creature, so if you do have like an arcane signet that you don't care about getting rid of, or you just need the cards right now, you have more outlets to sacrifice to, and it draws you 2 cards and creates you a treasure token back, so it is sort of a ramp card on top of that, kind of just a really good effect, gives you a lot of different options, very powerful. Black Market Connections, one of its modes lets you draw a card and lose 2 life. The one thing you kind of also have to be careful about with Black Market Connections, it's sort of a Sylvan Library thing where you always want to take the max every time. If you take all 3 modes, you're losing 6 life a turn, which is quite a lot, but you do have to choose at least one. It's 1 or more. So you are creating, usually at least a treasure token every turn. That's really nice to have, really, the treasure token and the card draw. But for this deck, honestly, all 3 modes are really, really nice because creating the token is just another thing you can have for sack fodder, and that a lot of times, that repeatable ability to make tokens is really valuable for what we're trying to do. Colossus Citadels are one game changer in the deck. Really cool card. It's very good. Obviously, it's just an amazing card. You can look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you would cast spells instead of paying mana, you pay life. So that's really cool. Of course, one of the best things to do with card advantage there is, and we have a lot of stuff low to the ground, so you can just, pay a good amount of life to get a lot of these effects, which is really nice. And then it has, an activated ability. But what we really care about with this is the fact that we can play cards off the top of our library for life. You can really snowball with this. There's a lot of combos you could add into this deck for it, but really, we're just playing it as a very good card. I talked about a few of these here. More Opportunist, is drawing us cards. Same thing with Grim Haruspex, just more card draw. Liliana, like I said, is one of the better ones because it's just whenever creatures we control die, we get card draw. Night's Whisper, just generically good card draw effect. 2 mana, draw 2. Really, really good for black. Sign in Blood, 2 mana, draw 2, lose 2. Also very good for black. Skull Clamp, one of the best, kind of a broken card when it shouldn't have been. 1 mana equipment that gives target creature +1/-1, and then whenever creature dies, draw 2 cards. So that's, we're making 1/1 tokens or 2/2 tokens. And even if you aren't, you can equip this, and even if it doesn't immediately die by getting the -1, you can, equip it to something, and then if you have a sacrifice outlet, you get whatever the thing you get with the sacrifice trigger. Maybe it's a Phyrexian Altar or something like that. You get the mana from it, and then you also get the card draw. And that's usually the best thing you can do is if you can equip this and then sack it to something else if it doesn't just straight die to that, because you get the more value out of it. But just, in general, Skull Climb is an amazing card. A lot of times paying 1 mana to draw 2 cards, absolutely absurd, especially when it's repeatable. Very good with that. Seasonal Loss, so one of its modes here is you can pay 2 pause. So technically with this card, you could use that twice to draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. So this is a part of the season cycle. You get 5 of a weird sort of resource. It's a weird modal spell where you can choose 5 pause worth of modes. So the first mode is each player sacrifices a creature. The second is draw a card for 2 pause. Draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. And then 3 pause is each opponent loses X life or X number of creature cards in your graveyard. So you can kind of combine it. You can do like 2 of the second one of the first one, 5 of the first one if you really wanted to, 1 of the third one, 2 of the second one, kind of mix and match, which is kind of cool. I really do like this cycle, and I hope they do this sort of thing going forward, where it's not really a resource, but it's an interesting modal spell that sort of, I know they're kind of doing it with Final Fantasy with the tiered cards, but those are just mana. It's not, you don't get all these different effects. It's not as good. But I just really like this sort of effect. I like modular cards and the abilities that they give you, and I think this is one of the more fun ways that they, decided to do modular cards. But definitely the card draw is really cool. And if you sag a whole bunch of stuff and then play this card, you could draw twice as, double as many creatures that died this turn, and, have everyone sag a creature. And, definitely the thing to note with this card and the way that it's phrased is so cool is the fact that the modes with any modular spell resolve top down. So first people will sacrifice, however many, you might have them sacrifice each 3 creatures, and then you draw cards equal to each thing, and then everyone loses life equal to the number of creature cards in graveyards. So they go 1 by 1, so you can have people sack stuff. Even if you hadn't have anything else die this turn, you could have everyone sack 3 creatures, do the second bomb mode, draw 3 cards. So that's, this this is definitely one of my favorite cards for this deck. It does a lot of whole different stuff for what we're doing, and you can, of course, on top of stuff, sacrifice a bunch of things and then play this card, but just kind of a fun modular spell. And then, of course, one of the best cards, I think, just generically is Yawgmoth Physician. Does a whole bunch of different stuff. It's a 4-mana 2/4. You can pay life, sack a creature to put a -1/-1 counter onto one target creature, and draw a card. So sack outlet, it can slowly whittle down creatures by sacking them. Gets around indestructible, which is really cool. You can just sort of shrink stuff or just shoot stuff if they're 1/1s. And then you can also pay 2 black, discard a card, proliferate. We don't really care too much about it. It's cool because it does synergize with himself, where you can proliferate the -1/-1 counters. Though maybe the discard, every once in a while that might end up being useful if you have a reanimation type effect. If you've got your massacre worm that's sitting in your hand, you don't have the mana to cast it, but you can pay 2 mana, get rid of it, and then reanimate it some way. That's kind of nice, sort of an extra thing there. But yeah, kind of just generically good card advantage package here with some kind of interesting goodies here and there. And like I talked about a little bit before, is the Edict effect. So Edict effect is just something that makes people sacrifice creatures, and it's kind of a big part of the deck because, any of these, if each player controls at least one creature, with Sephiroth out, this is really big because it cares about the 4th time its ability is resolved of a creature dying. So if you have him out and you play something like a Cursed Marauder that has everyone sacrifice a non-token creature, you sacrifice, usually with these, the cool thing with these edict type effects that are creatures is they come down and then you can sacrifice them to themselves. You aren't really losing anything, and you have everyone else sacrifice a creature, but in a 4-player game where everyone has to sacrifice a creature, you're getting your 4 triggers and you immediately get to flip Sephiroth. So that's really the biggest way any of these type of effects to flip Sephiroth immediately is to get one of these creatures down after playing Sephiroth. It's just an immediate flip trigger, which is really cool. Usually you play Sephiroth, the next turn you play one of these cards, he flips, and then you can immediately attack. So very much try not to run too many of these because at a point they don't become as good when you're playing them. It kind of depends on your meta as well. If they're super creature heavy, it gets a little bit worse. Really the best thing is when someone has only 1 or 2 creatures out. These edicts are the most valuable because they have to get rid of their best thing or have to choose between some of their best things. But honestly, you at least want a 1 or 2 creatures out for each player. That way you get the sack triggers to be able to flip Sephiroth. So a Cursed Marauder, probably the best one. I think it's a 2-mana 2/1. It's the only 2-mana edict effect here where everyone has to sacrifice a non-token creature, and that's really big because a lot of times people will have 20 or so tokens and then 4 non-token creatures that care about the tokens. So if edicts aren't as good against token decks because they can sacrifice any number of creatures, not really care, but this kind of skirts through that by making them sack non-token creatures. And there's maybe 1 or 2 times where they only have non-token or only token creatures that this doesn't do anything to them, but most of the time it's just a better effect. Flare Mouse is really cool because it does sort of the same thing, but honestly a little better because it can be free. This is part of the Flare cycle from Modern Horizons 3. It's 4-mana instant, or you can sacrifice a non-token black creature rather than pay its mana cost, which is really good for a deck just for the sack trigger. But it says each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. Most people aren't playing planeswalkers, so a lot of times this is just, hey, I have some sort of creature I don't care about out, I sacrifice it, everyone else has to sacrifice a creature, you still get your 4 and you get your 4 triggers to flip Sephiroth. Flashback Marauder and Plaguecrafter are the exact same thing. Plaguecrafter at least says each player who can't sacrifice a thing has to discard a card, so it's a small bit better. Talked about Season of Loss. You can, with the 1-paw mode, you can do that 1 time. If everyone's got a creature, again, you can just flip Sephiroth and then just get a whole bunch of stuff off of the other triggers if you want it. Kind of nice with that. Lastly, we have Will of the Abzan, one of the brand new cards I'm just throwing into this deck. It's a will card, so if you control your commander, you can choose both modes of the spell. So it's a 4-mana sorcery that says you can either have any number of target opponents, each sacrifice creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls, or lose 3 life. Or return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, or if you get both, it's a reanimation spell on top of an edict effect. This technically is just any number of target opponents. So if you've only got 3 opponents, it won't immediately trigger Sephiroth, but just in general, it's still a very good edict effect. And most of the time with this deck, we're running so many different, sacrifice type effects in the deck. We're having our creatures die so often that most of the time you're still gonna be able to trigger Sephiroth with this card. an interaction where we kind of look at interaction light. We only have 7 cards in this, but we also have to mind the fact that we are running all these edicts, so we are interacting through this, and we are also running 4 board wipes in the deck, which are another piece of interaction. So it looks like a little light here, but these are just very much not in either of those other categories. These are targeted either for us or against our opponents. So Darkness, of course, is just a really great card. It's a black fog, just prevents all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Very, very good for our deck. And a lot of people forget Darkness is even in black. I just am also very high on fogs at the moment. I think it's very, very good. I think the type of effect, especially with how many, you know, attack trigger types deck and how many, you know, go wide decks I've seen a lot recently, and just, you know, how important it is to go to combat, being able to, you know, kind of blow someone out with this by, you know, they're fully swinging at you, trying to kill you, and then, you know, they're tapped down. So you can either come back and swing back at them, you know, get that crack back, or someone else gets to swing in, or, you know, maybe save someone, use it as a political move, you know, whatever have you. All of that's just kind of nice. It does a whole lot of different stuff, and very much can catch people off guard. Not the Voidwalker. I put in the interaction category because it's kind of a stacks piece. It says if a card would be put into opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it with a void counter. And this is instead, so it never hits the graveyard. So if any opponents have any like death triggers where they care about stuff hitting the graveyard or reanimation type effects, that never happens. But really the biggest thing with Dothy is the fact that you can tap it and sacrifice him to choose an exiled card an opponent controls with a void counter on it, and you may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. So absolutely busted. Very, very good. Allowing you to cast cards for free that, you know, get milled, get sacrificed, you know, get discarded, whatever. Anytime it would just be put into a graveyard from anywhere, it gets exiled under him. So great for graveyard hate, but really great for just a whole bunch of value on top of everything else. And the 2 black pips can be nice for devotion things as well. Feed the Swarm, kind of a cool moto spell. It's sorcery speed, which is not as great for, you know, a destruction spell, but it has destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that opponent's mana cost. So this is one of the 2 effects really that we have. We have both of them in the deck. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 in the entirety of black that can destroy enchantments. So very much highly valued in the deck. I've always run Feed the Swarm in any of my black decks if I don't have access to, you know, green or white that have the ability to destroy enchantments. I'm running Feed the Swarm all the time, and Withering Torment was another great include and a really awesome card to get from Duskmourn. It's an extra mana, but it's instant speed and it destroys target enchantment or creature, and you only lose 2 life. So Feed the Swarm can sometimes feel a little bad if you're having to destroy something big like an Omniscience. Well, most of the time if you got to destroy Omniscience, you're probably already dead anyway, but anything like sort of big, you're losing a whole lot of life to destroy it, and like I said, it's sorcery speed, so you can't really interact whenever you want to. You have to kind of do it out in the open. Some places on their turn where they try to do something, you know, you can't really interact there. But still, you know, when we can kind of get with our enchantment removal. Imp's Mischief, I was really glad this got reprinted in Outlaws at Thunder Junction, because it's a very good card, one of our few sort of counter spelly type of cards. It's a deflecting SWAT effect, really. One of the black instant says change the target of target spell with a single target, you lose life equal to that spell's mana value. So it can be definitely used as a counter spell, where what you can do is someone tries to counter one of your things, cast this, retarget that counter spell to Imp's Mischief to fizzle that instead, which is kind of cool. Though, if you know, it's anything, so if someone tries to destroy one of your creatures, you can retarget to one of their creatures. That's kind of nice. It's kind of specific, you know, you lose life equal to the spell's mana value, because of course the thing is black, you have to lose life somehow, has to be a cost to it, and it only has to have a single target. So if there's some sort of mass target thing, you know, that you're not gonna be able to get around that, or even if it has more than one target. But you know, this gets around a lot of stuff and is kind of just, you know, we have so few interaction pieces in mono black that I think it's a really cool card to be able to have. Infernal Grasp, but just a very generically good pay 2 mana to destroy target creature. And Tragic Slip, I like this one because it has Morbid, so normally it just gives target creature -1/-1 until end of turn, but if a creature has died this turn, target creature gets -13/-13 until end of turn. So that's gonna kill most things on the board, and this is not a destroy effect. It reduces the power of something, so it does get around indestructible, which is really cool, and it's 1 mana, so 1 mana destruction effect, or just, you know, kill a creature effect, is really cool, because most of the time we're aristocrat stack, we're going to be triggering Morbid pretty frequently. All right, and then lands, so kind of generically good here. I just kind of threw in all of the good black stuff that we can run. So Majuko Bog, being able to exile graveyards, is kind of nice. Cabal Coffers and our good old Urborg, because of that, of course, you know, you're mono black. I didn't really want to hold back with the mana base, because monocolor, you only get so many options, but black very much the best, I think, for monocolor mana bases. We've got that little combo going where you can have Cabal tap for each swamp you control, and then Urborg makes everything swamps. Very cool if you have Swamp Walk type of stuff, that can kind of matter too. Cabal Stronghold says pay 3 mana, tap it, add a black for each basic swamp you control. We're running 24 basic swamps, so quite a lot there. We've got Crypt of Agadim, so it enters tapped, but you can pay 2 and tap it to add black for each black creature card in your graveyard. We're only going to have black creatures, and we're going to be putting a lot of them to our graveyard, so that's another very good card for the deck, can add a lot of mana. High Market, so this is just a land that can allow us to sacrifice creatures, which is kind of nice. Malakir Rebirth on the back side is a land, and then has other effects on the front side, so kind of nice to have the flip lands in, just to kind of get that modality. Really cool. Nykthos, of course, I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but mono black definitely has a lot of colored pips in all of its permanents, and so your devotion usually skyrockets very easily. We have a lot of black pips in what we're trying to play, so kind of nice. This usually can tap you turn 3, 4, 5 for a whole bunch of extra mana. Kind of just a nice little accelerant. For Phyrexian Tower, we can get extra mana out of sacrificing your creatures, which is nice. Reliquary Tower, kind of a catch-22 with this card, because sometimes discarding down to hand size can be nice, because you're putting stuff in the graveyard to maybe reanimate, though we are drawing a lot of cards with this deck. That's a lot of our commander does it, and we have a lot of card advantage engines, and so having something that gives us no max hand size is just kind of cool with that. And we're running so many basics that we can afford to run some of these colorless utility lands. And lastly here we have Urza's Cave. This one's kind of nice because it's sort of our black crop rotation. You can pay 3 and sack it to search your library for a land card, put on the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. Usually it's one of our 2 Urborg or Cabal coffers, just whatever one we don't have, though a lot of times it might even be Nykthos. Kind of just a good modal card to kind of grab what we need in the moment. Kind of a nice tutor effect there. A good amount of ramp. There's not a whole lot of lands. We're only running 35 lands in the deck, though, like I said earlier, our curve isn't super high. It's really 3 and below. We have some stuff that's 4 and over, but not a lot of it. Most of our stuff's fairly easy to get to, and, with this mana base, of course, generates a whole lot of extra mana compared to a lot of other monocolored, so we, don't have to run too much of that, and we're running a good amount of ramp, too. So, of course, we got our Arcane Signet, our Soul Ring. A Jet Medallion's really nice, reducing all of our spells that are black. Bantu's Monument reduces black creature spells by 1, and whenever we cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life, so a little bit of life drain. Bubbling Muck, I've not seen this run a whole lot in a lot of different decks. I'm very surprised. I don't think a lot of people know about this card. It's sort of just black High Tide. So it's a 1 mana sorcery that says until end of turn, whenever a player taps a swamp for mana, it produces an additional black. Huge card, very, very awesome. You cast this on turn 4 or whatever, get a whole bunch of extra, 2 extra mana off of what you're doing. The rest of your 3 swamps tap for black. Very, very awesome. Just a good way to sort of get a dark ritual type of effect. Cryptcast is the exact same thing. Whenever we tap a swamp for mana, we add a black to our mana pool, which is cool, and it also has extort if you want to get a little bit of extra value out of that. Sort of the same effect, but of course Cryptcast stays around every single turn. You get a bunch of it. Just doubling your mana is really awesome. Dark Ritual itself is in the deck because if you're playing mono black, I don't think there's any reason you wouldn't run Dark Ritual. Just getting 2 extra mana on top of your turn is very, very good. This is great. Turn 1 you can get out Sephiroth, which is really cool. Very good for a commander that's only 3 mana. Though a lot of our stuff, like I said, is 3 and below, so you can play 1, even 2 cards a turn on your first turn with something like this, and just a very good accelerant. Crick, probably our best one in the deck. Very, very good mono black card. So it says you may pay for each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. So it's a Phyrexian mana. So he himself, you can just pay 4 mana for and 6 life. And then whenever you cast a black spell, you put a counter on him, and he has lifelink, so a good way to get that mana back. So any cost. So it doesn't matter what we're doing. It's really cool with Cryptcast because it has the extort cost that says you can pay black to extort. Each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain life equal to life lost that way. So with 3 opponents, they each lose a life, and you gain 3 life. So extort, actually, if you pay the mana for it, every time you cast a spell, you can pay 2 life. You drain everyone for 1, and you actually gain 3 life back. So every time you pay that, you can play it for free, of course, through Crick's ability, and you actually gain 1 life every time you cast a spell, which is really cool. But just for a lot of effects, Crick, basically reduces every single card in our deck by its black mana cost. And if you can combine that with like Jet Medallion type effects, you can cast a lot of spells for free. It's kind of a nuts card. Scepter of Eternal Glory, a very, very good mana rock. So it's a 4 mana legendary artifact that says it taps for 1 mana of any color, and then you can tap it for 3 mana of any one color, but only activate if you control 3 or lands with the same name. Of course, this card is best in monocolored decks where you're running a whole bunch of 1 land, all of our basic lands being 4 swamps really quick. Kind of nice there. Very easy to turn on, just kind of a color Thran Dynamo. Very good card. A little more expensive on the side. Just came from a Necron precon back in Warhammer a few years ago, but a very, very good card. What I also don't see a whole lot, but is great for anything that cares about the graveyard that's in black. Songs of the Damned. It's a 1-mana instant that says add a black for each creature card in your graveyard. Very, very good. Like, even if you can get 2 or 3 creature cards in your graveyard, this can be a dark ritual very fast. And a lot of times it's even better, twice as good, triple as good as a dark ritual. Very good card, not expensive anyway, and just can definitely give us a whole lot of mana for very little. And then we talked about reanimation a little bit throughout the review. Definitely a big thing with this deck because, like I said, we want to sacrifice tokens and get rid of our, fodder creatures for a lot of our sacrifice triggers. But we don't always have that, or, we may want to, have a creature re-enter the battlefield or just get a little bit of extra value off of what we're doing. So we have a good amount of things that do bring creatures back from the graveyard. So Animate Dead, of course, when it enters, you choose any card in any graveyard, and that's a few of these actually can be any creature card. So if your opponents have stuff in their graveyards, you can grab that instead. So the modality is really cool on that. So when this enters, you choose a creature card in the graveyard, you enchant it, it comes back and it gets -1/-0. So it's a little bit weaker, but most of the time we don't care about that. This isn't a super swing heavy deck besides like the commander. It's mostly aristocrats, just sort of a 2-mana reanimate effect. Of course, we have actual reanimate. It's 1 black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then you lose life equal to its mana value. Most of the time we don't care about the life because we're going to be gaining a whole bunch of it back with aristocrat effects. Literally the best reanimation effect, of course. It's literally reanimate. Kind of nice there. So Malakir Rebirth, we talked about it being the land, but the front side is also very good. So you can choose target creature. You lose 2 life until end of turn. When that creature gains, when this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped or it's under its owner's control. So there's a lot of these like not dead after all type of effects that are just 1-mana black instants that say when creature dies, return it back to the battlefield. So you can definitely put a lot of those in the deck, but they're a little situational. I think a commander that is a sack outlet by itself is a lot better for that. It's a little bit hard because, a lot of times you're like, oh, I have this card, or you don't draw the card at the right time, or you have creatures cards in your graveyard you'd rather reanimate, and this is a sort of reanimation effect, but you have to do it in the moment the creature dies. It can be good interaction. If someone tries to destroy one of your creatures, you can put this on it and you get it back for free, so that's kind of nice. Kind of be interaction that way. Mostly in this deck because it is a flip land, but you can add more of these effects if you're like, okay, I know I'm going to be sacrificing a lot of creatures all the time, but I don't like how situational it is. I've goldfished this deck quite a lot, and I don't like how, I'll draw this and I'll have a bunch of creatures cards in my graveyard that I want to reanimate, or if I don't have something on the battlefield that I have the ability to. I like how just with our actual reanimation effects that you can kind of do whenever we want. We don't have to worry about doing everything with the right timing. But because it is a flip card, it's just kind of a good one to add around. Though you could add more of those effects if you want to go more heavily into reanimation. Dread Return, really like this one. I run it in a lot of decks because I think it's really fun. It's a 4-mana return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Very expensive as far as reanimation goes, but it has flashback. As long as it's in the graveyard, you can pay the cost of sacrificing 3 creatures rather than its mana cost. So when you flash it back, you pay the cost and then exile it. So this is really awesome. There's a few ways we might mill a card or whatever, or just get into this graveyard. Even if you do end up playing this, you can actually play it twice in a turn, which is really cool. A reanimation effect that can be used more than once is really nice. And a lot of times, the sacrifice 3 creatures is not too hard to get, and a lot of times can even be nice for us as sort of a pseudo-sac outlet one time. Sacrifice those creatures, get whatever aristocrats effects off of that, and then of course it's no mana to reanimate a creature from your graveyard. Just kind of all around a nice card. Necromancy has a whole lot of text because it was made back in the day where they had to word it kind of weirdly to make sure the effect worked correctly, and because it was worded so weirdly, the rules text had to kind of reflect that now. So Necromancy's enchantment says you may cast it as though they had flash. If you cast it at any time a sorcery couldn't have been cast, so if you cast it at flash speed, the controller of the permanent, it becomes sacrifices at the beginning of the next cleanup step. So a lot of things there. Basically, if you cast it at flash speed, you only get it for that turn. If you cast it at sorcery speed, when it enters, you put it, if it's on the battlefield, it becomes an aura, so it stops being just a regular enchantment, becomes an aura, and says enchant creature it says a lot of different things. Really, the thing we care about here is when it enters, it's just another animate dead from anyone's graveyard. It says a lot of, wall text. It's confusing me even, but really the big thing we care about here is you can cast it at flash speed, which is kind of nice to get, one-time effect to, if something, on someone else's turn, you need to get something out of the graveyard, have that little extra ability. And then just, of course, another straight-up reanimation effect from anyone's graveyard is nice on top of everything else. Very, very weird, confusing wording like Living Death, where it says a bunch of different things, has a lot of rules text on it for the, specific situations that might matter. For most of the time, it's just, hey, put this on the battlefield to reanimate something. It attaches to that thing. That's it. So, Reanimation also kind of includes Living Death because we are reanimating our entire graveyard. So it's kind of that dual effect of, blowing up the board. We kind of talked about it earlier, blowing up the board on everyone else's side and then getting our whole graveyard back because we've, sacked a bunch of stuff and put it in the graveyard. Unearth, I also really like this one. So it's a 1 mana sorcery that just says return target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I've talked about it a few times already, but the curve of the deck is mostly 3 and below. So this is hitting a good amount of our creatures. I think there's only like 10 of our 30-something creatures that this doesn't hit. So we're able to get a whole lot of stuff from our graveyard back. And it also has cycling too, so you can just pay 2 mana to discard it to draw a card. So if you have nothing better to do, you can just, filter it out for something better. But having that ability to reanimate for 1 mana as well with no other drawback besides the mana cost is kind of nice. Victimize, I really, really like this one because it's a dual reanimation type of effect. You choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, you sacrifice a creature, and then you turn the creature cards in your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So 3 mana, get to reanimate 2 creatures. It's very, very nice, a very good rate. And, of course, again, sacrificing a creature can also be sort of an upside within our deck. We've talked about Will of the Abzan. Its second mode allows us to reanimate a creature from our graveyard. Very bad for 4 mana. Zombify is a card we could also run if we really wanted to. But the fact that it has both modes, we can have people sacrifice stuff is kind of the big thing with this card. And speaking of sacrifices, we kind of talked about the entire time with the deck. We've got 10 sack outlets in the deck because we want to really make sure that we have the ability to sacrifice creatures when they come up. So Ashnod's Altar, sacrifice a creature, add 2 mana of colorless, which isn't really nice. We got Phyrexian Altar, sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So that one, grave color sort of things, if you want to go towards a more infinite sort of loop, Phyrexian Altar and Ashnod's Altar definitely get you there. Ayara, First of Lockthwain, whenever it or another black creature enters, each one loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, so it's kind of impact tremors, but also has the activated ability to sacrifice another black creature to draw a card, so it's a sack outlet that allows us to draw. Very nice with that. Bolas's Citadel does have the ability. It's usually not useful in most decks. Most people just, the first 2 lines of text are good enough because just being able to play stuff from the top of your library for free is really, really good. But you can tap it and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, tap each opponent, lose 10 life. So most of the time, that's way too steep of a cost. So if everyone's low enough, you can blow 1 or 2 people out of the game with this because 10 life is quite a lot. That you have to have the 10 non-land permanents to sacrifice, though there are a lot of ways in this deck that you can just sacrifice a lot of creatures. So it can be a giant sack outlet for you. And, on top of the 10 life that it, gives you as an effect for sacrificing those things, all the Blood Artist effects that we have in the deck, you could, even from, max life or close to, starting life totals, you could, end up killing 1 or 2 people with this effect. It's just a very, very powerful card. We've talked about Hard Market, so being able to sacrifice a creature to gain 1 life, not very good, but the fact it's on a land that we can sacrifice stuff is, the big thing here, just repeatable, being able to do that every single turn. Phyrexian Tower's obviously the best of these 2, because we can sacrifice a creature to add 2 black, so it's also kind of a ramp spell in that way. Viscerus here, just a 1 mana black creature that allows us to sacrifice a creature to scry 1. Kind of nice sort of pseudo card advantage with that. Warren Soul Trader, kind of the card that goes infinite. With Gravecrawler, if you want to, you can pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature to create a treasure token. So this is also sort of rampy in that way. You've got this and Pitiless Plunderer out is pretty cool. Getting a whole bunch of treasure tokens off of this, and it's a zombie, and that's kind of why the Gravecrawler thing is so good. But just generically, a really nice card for what we're doing. One of the better sort of things we get, like even outside of Phyrexian Altar, this is even better, getting just a straight up treasure token that you could just keep around rather than just a straight up floating mana. Woe Strider, I kind of forgot about this card for a long time, but I know it's very good. When it enters, it creates you a token, which, again, like I said, we value very heavily in this deck, getting some fodder out. You can sacrifice another creature to scry one, same thing as the Viscera Seer, and like you can also escape it by paying 5 mana and exiling 4 cards, other cards from your graveyard, and when it escapes, it gets a little bit bigger. Mostly the fact that I really like this card because when you reanimate it or sacrifice it or whatever, you get the token along with it, so sort of the same thing with the Marionette Apprentice, where you get the Fabricate. Getting 2 creatures for 1 is really cool, and having a sacrifice outlet on top of that is also very nice. Yawgmoth we've also talked about before. You can pay 1 life to sacrifice a creature to draw cards. Just a whole lot of different stuff to allow us to sacrifice things because it's so necessary for the deck. We really want to make sure that we're able to kill our creatures when we want to, and we're able to do it often. In terms of value, we've got a few interesting cards for the value category. Abhorrent Overlord is probably our best token creation in the deck. So it's a 7 mana 6/6 flying demon that says when it enters, you put a number of 1/1 black heartbeat creature tokens on the with flying onto the battlefield equal to your devotion to black. So a lot of times this is going to be 5, 6, 7 creatures you're getting. Really good sack fodder, especially if you have a flipped commander. I'm able to sacrifice all those. Abhorrent Overlord also says at the beginning of your upkeep, you just sacrifice a creature, though you can just sack it to itself. Very easy to get it out of the way. And, a lot of times you might even want to do that because you can reanimate it, do it again over and over. A lot of that all the stuff that our deck is doing really much benefits off of Abhorrent Overlord. Avenge of the Fallen is one of our other sort of big token creators. It's from the new Dragonstorm set. It has Mobilize X, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So if you got 4 creature cards in your graveyard, when it attacks, it makes 4 1/1 warriors tapped and attacking that you have to sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step, which is normally a pretty big downside for decks where you don't get to keep those warriors around even if they do survive combat. But for this deck, it's just kind of a free sack outlet because they have to sacrifice themselves, which is really cool. Or, you don't have to wait till the end step. You could sacrifice it to one of our, 10 sack outlets and get something else out of that, but just another good way to get a whole bunch of creatures through that. And because it's an attack trigger, you can stack it with Sephiroth, so you can have this resolve, make however many creatures in your graveyard, make that many tokens, and then Sephiroth can sacrifice those to draw cards. So kind of a good engine you can kind of get going, and kind of the peak of our repeatable sort of token creation is Bitter Blossom. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 fairy rogue creature token with flying. Flying can be relevant, even in today's sort of commander. I've seen people get blown out by flyers just because they have flying. It's still very good evasion to this day, so that can be kind of nice. Mostly the fact you can get this down before your commander. It makes a token at your upkeep, play the commander second, draw a card. Very much occurs well with what we're trying to do, but just the repeatable 1 token on each of our turns is really nice. Bloodghast is sort of another repeatable thing, so can't block. It has haste as long as the opponent has 10 or less life. We don't really care about any of that. Really, the fact is, landfall, whenever a land you control enters, you may return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a good way where you're like, okay, I haven't played my land for turn, I have Bloodghast out, I sacrifice him to whatever effect, play a land, you get him back out. So this is another good way to sort of repeatedly use the same creature over and over again to get more and more sack triggers. Gisa, this is sort of another thing you can do with the deck because we are targeting people with like Sephiroth type abilities. That is a crime. So Giza, the Hellraiser, is a 5 mana 4/4 with Ward 2 and pay 2 life. It says skeletons and zombies you control +1/+1 and have menace. Doesn't really matter. What we care about, it says whenever you commit a crime, create 2 tapped 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature tokens. This ability only triggers once each turn. So this is really nice. You can play this, sacrifice something, you target someone, and then targeting something, someone or anything that they control. Just messing with any opponent anyway really commits a crime. And so because of that, you're able to commit a crime and immediately get 2 more tokens off of this. And this is another repeatable one. It's only once each turn, but if you can do that on opponent's turns, you're able to, sacrifice one of the tokens that you do create to something, have Sephiroth trigger or a Blood Arch trigger, target someone, make 2 more things every turn. So being able to make 2 tokens every single turn, not just your turns, 8 around, is awesome. I really, really like this card. I even saw some playing standard because of how good it was. Gary, Great Merchant of Asphodel is just one of those cards you kind of run in your mono black deck. It's just that good. So it's a 5 mana 2/4 that when it enters, each opponent loses X life and you where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to life lost this way. I wanted to say the opponents lose X life and you gain X life where X is your devotion, but that's not the case. This is actually way better than that because you have 3 opponents. Gary enters, you have, 5 devotion to black, whatever. Each opponent loses 5 life, but you gain life equal to life lost this way. So because of that, basically, with 3 opponents, you gain triple your devotion to black, which is very huge. Like 5 devotion is very not that hard to hit. If you got your commander and Gary, that's 3 of it. You play a Bloodghast, you got 5 devotion. You're draining a good amount, 5 from each opponent, but gaining 15 is huge. That almost is half your health immediately gained back, which is really, really cool. And then of course the big thing is you can sack this and reanimate it over and over again. This is one of our best ETB triggers in the deck. Could very easily kill people because it's just over and over and over again. You're just able to drain life. Very nice with that. Last but not least, we have Saw in Half. So this is another card I just really, really love playing in a lot of decks, either token decks or aristocrat decks. It's a 3-mana instant that says destroy target creature. If that creature dies this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are copies of that creature, except their power is half that creature's power. Their toughness is half that creature's toughness rounded down. So that's really awesome. I really like this card for non-legendary creatures. Sawing in Half, like an Abhorrent Overlord, is absolutely nuts. This can be sort of seen. I don't even have it in the interaction category because I don't think I've almost ever used a Saw in Half on an opponent's creature because it's usually not that good. It does destroy a creature, but you get 2 of those creatures back. So it kind of just, of course, it saws the creature in half. You get 2 of those creatures, and they're half as big. Sort of that weird. I think it's an infinity card. Sort of that weird, jokey sort of card that ends up being very, very good. If you're able to Saw in Half an Overlord and you've got 7 devotion or whatever, split that in half. Tokens do retain the devotion of the creature. It has the same mana cost. So you've got 7 devotion, that splits in half. You have 9 devotion, they each trigger, you're getting 18 tokens, whatever. If you can Saw in Half a Gary or something, is absolutely insane. A lot of our creatures in the deck, even if you're sawing in half a sack outlet, can be kind of nice just for more bodies on the board. Very much has a really high ceiling for this deck, and most decks, I think it's a really, really fun one. I like running a lot of stuff, and it can actually kind of be used as a protection spell. If someone, tries to go kill one of your creatures, you're like, hey, I'm just going to saw this in half and get 2 of them, fizzle their thing because the original target's gone, it's been destroyed. But yeah, just overall, I love these toolbox sort of cards that can offer a lot of power that, kind of sneakily get in there, kind of fly under the radar. But if you know how to use them correctly, it can definitely give you a lot more than you first expect. But yeah, that is our Sephiroth Fabled Soldier deck. So many different weird names for these cards that I don't really understand, but very cool card. A lot of cool stuff with this deck. I really do enjoy the sort of thing you're doing. I do think, kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but the fact that you could make this a crime deck if you wanted to, because, of course, Sephiroth is targeting people. So there's a good amount of black cards that can commit crimes or care about committing crimes, that sort of thing. Or if you want to throw Sephiroth in a crime deck, I think it's very, very good effect. So you can sort of pivot more into that if you wanted to. There's a few different ways you can take this in. We went very much heavily aristocrats, trying to make a lot of things with the deck, though. If you wanted to crank up this power level, just add in a few tutors, really. Because we like a lot of the cards in the deck. A lot of them are very good, but there's a few bombs, like Liliana is one of them. Same thing like Driv, not being able to double triggers, that sort of thing. If you're able to get one of our better cards on the battlefield that sort of, pump synergy into all of our other cards, that's very good. Doubling triggers off of other stuff if you wanted to throw in like a roaming throne for, in here, kind of just get another Drivnod type of effect is kind of cool. But really, tutors, of course, in any deck immediately up the efficiency because you're able to grab the best card in your deck for the best situation, and kind of just up the lessen the variability of what you're drawing, because you're able to get the specific thing that you need at the moment. But yeah, kind of just a fun thing. I really enjoyed building this deck. I like all these sort of weird, different things that we're getting with Final Fantasy. I like when new sets come out because a lot of times they go into, kind of different mechanics, and I think this is a very, very powerful commander. I haven't really played a whole lot of mono black aristocrats. Most of my aristocrat decks are black and white because, you get a lot of extra value out of that, a lot of more aristocrat stuff. So being able to build mono black aristocrats is very fun. And of course, it's a very, very popular commander with very, very awesome art. I think it's gonna be a really fun one to run. But if you have enjoyed this video, you should make sure to go look at the deck list in the description. I'll leave the Moxfield link down there. You can also check out the playlist to all of my other deck reviews in the description as well. Besides all of that, I will see all of you beautiful people in the next one.